I'm going to make my remarks really brief because I don't want to take any time away from Charles Best tonight. My fiance and I were at a Giving Pledge conference in Virginia. I think it was last June. We were there with Laura's father, Ted Turner, and others. And during the conference, we had to make a selection one afternoon. There were the breakout sessions. We had to pick one of four. And, you know, frankly, three of them I couldn't understand at all. And it was an incredible conference. There were just the topics and the conversations were not ones that I was familiar with. And I wasn't sure exactly what Donors Choose was all about either. But it made some sense to me. And I said to Angie, I said, let's go attend this one. And, you know, in the next hour, or maybe a little less than that, but I felt like I was 20, 30 years younger listening to Charles Best, and got so excited about the opportunity because I think, and this is really addressed to the teachers in this room tonight, I helped build a business that was based on listening. I'm talking about the Home Depot now, not talking about the Falcons or our Major League Soccer franchise, our PGA business. All those is true as well, but we built that business based on listening to the customers, listening to the associates on the floors of over 2,000 stores throughout the United States and Canada and elsewhere. And one of the things that excites me and excited me in running our company for 23 years with my partner Bernie was that we always came back with great wisdom by listening to the people that were closest to the reality of the customers that we were serving. And what got me so excited about listening to Charles that day in Virginia was and he'll explain the way the program works, you know, very quickly. He can do it in 60 seconds or less beautifully, which is a unique talent to be able to do that. But the beauty of this is that it connects, you know, the people's willingness to make a difference, to give back, to want to challenge their resources, big, small, whatever it may be, to the actual needs that are represented by the students through the teachers in public schools throughout the United States. And to me, it's not, you know, often I sit in meetings and I listen to folks sit around, you know, fancy boardrooms and really nice tables and debate, you know, very philosophical, high-level issues and approaches, which, you know, are not fundamentally wrong, but they may be 10, 20, 30-year kind of resolves. The beauty of what I think Donors Choose does and what Charles has created since 2000 is that it has the ability to make change immediately, and it has the ability to respond immediately to what students are asking for, what teachers are asking for on behalf of their students. And the success, which I'll let him talk about since 2000, has been incredible. I don't know the numbers the way Charles does the back of his hands, but you stop and think about this. This young, brilliant entrepreneur that probably could have done a version of Home Depot himself has done it really in this way. The organization has mobilized in excess of 1.8 million donors since 2000, has contributed more than $330 million to fund 600,000 classroom projects that's affecting over 15 million students. Charles, during our foundation meeting today, talked about, somebody asked, one of our trustees asked him about his goals in the next year or so, and I'll let him share that with you. But the important thing is this is an opportunity to make immediate impacts on kids, on giving our teachers the opportunities to arm themselves with what they know they need today to make a difference in the lives of our students. The other things we work on collectively and collaboratively in partnership with other things are endemic, they're critical. We have to make changes long term. We get all that. But how do we impact these young folks today and support our teachers who are putting their time, their effort, their energy, their enthusiasm, and their commitments into making a difference? So without really further comment, Charles, let me bring you up. It's an honor to have you in Atlanta. It really is. We are looking forward to working with you. The pipeline project we're excited about. We think there's a tremendous need, but it really goes beyond just this one project. It goes into, you know, how do we listen? How do we listen to our students? How do we listen to our teachers? And how do we respond to them in a real way, quickly, to get resources in their hands that'll make a difference in the lives of the people that we all care about, which is our students. Thank you very much. Charles, welcome.
Hey there. Good evening. I cannot tell you how excited I am to be here. Arthur, your introduction was one of the most generous and kind anyone has ever given for me. I'm going to work my very hardest to live up to your description, and I'm just so grateful to you for having me here. I understand that music legend Usher and Grace are going to be joining us. Shaka Zulu, Ludacris's manager, is here. We have Laura Turner of the Captain Planet Foundation, and more importantly than those individuals, we have some of Atlanta's greatest teachers in this room, and that just gets me so excited to be speaking with you. And knowing that I would be speaking with you tonight, I wanted to get a feel for Atlanta. It's been a few years since I've been in this city, and because we're going to be talking about crowdfunding, I figured I should take a crowdfunding tour of Atlanta. And I started at Kickstarter. How many of you are familiar with Kickstarter? How many of you have backed a project on Kickstarter? Raise your hands. All right, awesome, the majority of you. For those of you who didn't raise your hands, Kickstarter is a funding platform for creative projects. Last year, people raised more than $500 million for wacky and awesome ideas through the site. And we're looking at 3 projects that creative people right here in Atlanta have up on the site live right now. On the left, you see an image representing Tracy and Demain's dream of creating a taco truck that will serve real Mexican street-style tacos in the Atlanta area. It's named for a street in LA where the very best Mexican tacos are made. And they've put up their project on Kickstarter to get the truck they need to bring those tacos to the people of Atlanta. In the middle, you see an image of Elliot Holden. He's an Atlanta musician. He described himself as Jimi Hendrix if Jimi Hendrix had been produced by Dr. Dre. And he wants to record an album, and so he's got a project up on Kickstarter right now to do just that. And on the right, you see a childhood book that a local woman here in Atlanta, Helen Wu, wants to publish and distribute to children all across the country. And to make that possible, she's got a project up on Kickstarter. Now, only 5 years ago, these creative Atlanta residents, Tracy and Demain, Elliot Holden, Helen Wu, they would have needed a rich uncle or industry connections or years of working their way up the ladder before they could have done these projects. But Kickstarter does away with all that. It lets you ask your friends and the world at large to support your creativity without any tastemakers or gatekeepers standing in your way. If your idea is awesome, it'll probably get funded. So after checking out the Kickstarter Atlanta offerings, I took my tour to Etsy. How many of you have bought an item on Etsy recently? Let's see a show of hands. Okay, just a little bit fewer than the folks who've backed projects on Kickstarter. So for those who aren't familiar, Etsy is a marketplace of things that are made by hand. And what you may not know is that crafters, artisans in Atlanta have 173,000 different items for sale on Etsy. We're looking at just 3 of them made by Atlanta crafters. You could get Bill Murray coasters made by someone in Atlanta. You could get a My Little Pony pajama suit sewed by an Atlanta craftswoman, or you could get note cards adorned with doggy treats. Some of Atlanta's finest crafts right there. Now, the people who make things by hand and sell them on Etsy used to work office jobs all day, reluctantly. They really wanted to be crafting, but they could only do that as a hobby in their spare time. Few of these people could have raised the money you need to make a prototype that a factory can manufacture, or persuade Macy's or Walmart to sell their product, or raise millions of advertising dollars to get consumers to buy their product. That's a process which lets only a lucky few become designers. And of course, it's a process that can sometimes suck the personality out of your creation. But then Etsy came along. And now crafters can pursue their passion as their day job. and sell their works to people all over the world. They don't have to break through all the barriers that until recently stood in the way of anyone who wanted to make beautiful things for a living. So after checking out all that Atlanta has to offer on Kickstarter and Etsy, of course I had to go to donorschoose.org and check out some of the more than 2,000 classroom projects that Atlanta teachers have gotten funded through our site. On the left, you see students in Miss Keel's classroom. She teaches at Agnes Jones Elementary School, and she, indeed, it's an honor to have you here. So we're talking about Ms. Keel at Agnes Jones Elementary School, who wanted a podium just like this for her students to be able to become public speakers. It was a $200 request that was funded by 2 donors who don't even live in Georgia. In the middle, you see students in Mrs. Marsh's classroom at Garden Hills Elementary School. Is she actually here? Are you her colleagues? Yes. Okay, awesome. Can you testify that Mrs. Marsh at Garden Hills Elementary School did indeed put up a project requesting an alphabet rug so that her kindergartners would have a place to sit that would enable them to learn and touch the letters of the alphabet and the numbers that they needed to comprehend? Is that true?
Yes, and she does it bilingually now.
And she does it bilingually.
Yes.
Awesome. And Mrs. Marsh's rug project for her kindergartners was also funded not only by donors in Atlanta, but by people all over the country. And finally, on the right, you see a project from Mrs. Onayuga, who teaches at Frederick Douglass High School, who, oh my gosh, this is awesome. Am I pronouncing her last name correctly? All right. All right. So this is a project for a garden because Mrs. Onayuga wants to create a garden where students will learn how to plant seeds and pollinate vegetables and flowers and apply all that they're learning in economics and math and science to this garden by selling the vegetables that they grow, by doing experiments on the soil. And she was requesting a wheelbarrow and shovels and rakes. It was an $800 project, also funded by people all over the country. Now at donorschoose.org, teachers go straight to the public with their best ideas for helping their students learn. Those teachers don't have to fill something out in triplicate or get an administrator to sign off or first pay their dues. In fact, there's nothing standing between their idea and a potential supporter. There's a change underway which I want to talk with you about this evening. It's a change in who you have to know and how long you have to wait and how lucky you have to be to bring a good idea to life. It's about a new kind of marketplace where gatekeepers do not stand in your way. Now, some people call this new movement crowdfunding, and donorschoose.org is a pioneer of this movement. So I want to tell you the inside story of how it got off the ground. And then we're going to do something that I think has never been done before at this speaker series. That's going to be the secret that we'll reveal at the end. Now, before we tell that story, I have one last question for you. How many of you had a teacher in high school who changed your life? Raise your hands. All right, just about everybody. That's awesome. That's great to see. I had a teacher like that myself. His name was Mr. Buxton. I'm going to show you a picture of him. There he is. So Mr. Buxton was my high school English teacher and my wrestling coach. And when I showed up as a dorky freshman in high school, Mr. Buxton spoke to me like he would to any adult. If he approved or disapproved of something I'd done, I knew it right away because he didn't have that mask that some grown-ups have when they're talking to kids. If I asked him a question on Wednesday, he'd come back to me on Friday saying that he'd thought about it, and he really had. He made you feel like he wanted you on his team. And looking back on it, I think it was Mr. Buxton who made me want to be a teacher. So 15 years ago, I started teaching history at Wings Academy, a public high school in the Bronx. But the high school where I was teaching did not have the same resources as when I was in Mr. Buxton's classroom. Where I went to high school, we went on field trips into the woods, we had graphing calculators for trigonometry, we had the supplies to do just about any art project we did not want for anything. But when I started teaching in the Bronx, I saw firsthand that all schools are not created equal. My colleagues and I would spend a lot of our own money on copy paper and pencils. I see some nodding heads. I suspect that just about every teacher in this room has gone deeply into their own pocket every year to buy supplies for their students. And my colleagues and I would talk in the teacher's lunchroom about books that we wanted our students to read, and a field trip we wanted to take them on, and a science experiment we wanted to run. What I wanted to do was to give my students each a copy of Little House on the Prairie. Those of you who only saw the TV show might think I was dumbing things down, but if you read the book, you will remember that Little House on the Prairie is actually a gripping, unsentimental account of pioneer life. And I will talk all night about how awesome that book is. But my students, even those who had never left New York City, they loved this book too. But the New York City school system was not about to underwrite the Little House on the Prairie series for my students. So I would get up about 5 in the morning, and I would go to the copy shop that was open 24 hours a day, and I would make photocopies of that day's section of Little House on the Prairie, which probably violated a lot of copyright laws. But as I was making those photocopies, I started thinking about all those resources, those books, that field trip, that science experiment that my colleagues wanted for their students. And it just occurred to me that there must be people out there who'd want to help teachers like us if they could see exactly where their money was going. So using pencil and paper, I drew out this website where public school teachers could create classroom project requests, and donors could choose the project that they wanted to support. For $2,000, a programmer who had recently arrived from Poland was willing to build that site. It was super rudimentary. The back end of the site was one page, and you'd have to scroll down and down and down for like 15 minutes to get to the teacher or the project you were looking for. To process a donation, I had one of those black boxes that you see at the grocery store where you punch in the credit card number and the dollar amount, and you send it over a telephone line, and it's like PayPal, but by hand. And it's a really good thing my students were helping me to get the site off the ground. And then I had to get my colleagues to try out this new site. Now, for the teachers in the room, I don't know what it's like at your schools, but at the high school where I was teaching, if you wanted to get teachers to do something, you gave them free food. I actually think somebody anticipated. Someone said free food before I even said it. So that is my mom's roasted pear dessert. She does these roasted pears with orange rind and apricot jam and spices, and they taste something delicious. So my mom made 11 of these pears, and I brought them into the teacher's lunchroom, and as my colleagues prepared to pounce, I said, hold up, there's a toll. If you eat one of these pears, you have to go to this new website called Donors Choose and ask for whatever it is you most want for your students. Propose the project that you've always wanted to do with them. Sounded like a pretty good deal. Took them like 20 seconds to scarf the 11 pears. And then they proceeded to post the first projects on our site. The health teacher, she wanted Baby Think It Over dolls, which are life-size, life-weight dolls that cry at 3 in the morning and need to be fed, and show a teenager what their responsibilities would be if they were to become a parent. The English teacher, he wanted to get his students ready for the SAT. He requested test prep books. The art teacher wanted to do a wall-to-wall quilt with each of her students sewing a square, and for that she needed fabric and thread and needles. The other history teacher and I wanted our students to meet Mokhtar Tayeb. He had been profiled in The New Yorker after escaping from modern-day slavery in Mauritania and West Africa. And our students had just finished reading the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. And we thought how incredible it would be if our students could meet a man, a living person who himself had escaped from slavery. So our students read this profile in The New Yorker, connected it to the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, and then we posted a project so that Mokhtar Tayeb could come into our school and our students could talk with him. So those were 4 of the first 11 project requests up on our site. My aunt, who's a nurse, she funded the first project. But I didn't know any more donors to fund the other 10 projects. So I funded them myself, which I could afford to do because I was still living at home with my parents, and they weren't charging me any rent, so I could spare some of my teacher's salary to fund my colleagues' projects. And because I donated anonymously, my colleagues mistakenly thought that the website actually worked. and that there were all these donors on the site just waiting to fulfill teachers' classroom dreams. So that rumor spread across the Bronx, and teachers started posting hundreds of projects that needed a whole lot more money than what I could afford by living at home with my parents. And I was in a really tough spot, not knowing how I was going to get these projects funded. But my students, they could see the potential of this experiment to change their lives at school. And so they volunteered every day for 4 months to write letters to people all over the country, telling them about this website where someone with $10 could be a classroom hero. We wanted to get the cheapest postal rate, so we sorted the mail ourselves, and every desk in my classroom was piled high with letters representing a different region of the country. And then we carted the sorted letters to the post office, and we crossed our fingers. It worked. My students' letter writing campaign generated $30,000 in donations to classroom projects on our site, and we were off. Another year went by. More teachers in the Bronx created projects, donors funded some of them, and then 9/11 happened. And teachers at the schools beside Ground Zero started creating projects on our site to recover from the attacks on the World Trade Center. I remember there was a math teacher whose students' calculators were sealed at the disaster site. Their classroom had been relocated to a basement, and she was requesting a new set of calculators for her students. There was an art teacher who wanted to bring in an artist from Afghanistan to do after-school workshops so students could meet someone from that country. There was a first-grade teacher whose students had been saved by a particular group of firemen, and her first graders wanted to thank the firemen who had saved them by doing a musical performance in front of their fire ladder company, and for that they needed musical instruments. There were hundreds of these projects related to 9/11, and I thought that local media would jump at this opportunity to participate in the recovery effort. This was right when people were making so many blood donations to the Red Cross that they couldn't even take more donations, and here was this direct way for people to help. But no local reporter would give me the time of day. I think I called 100 of them with no success. So I figured I'd better aim higher. Holy Grail was the New York Times. They had a new reporter covering nonprofits and philanthropy. Her name was Stephanie Strom, and I figured if we could get Stephanie Strom of the New York Times to do a story about our site, we would have a shot at big-time impact. So I put together a package of materials, mailed them to Stephanie Strom at the New York Times, and I didn't hear back. So I called her up a few weeks later, and she was nice to me, but she said that we were not exactly newsworthy. She said, you know, if ever I'm doing a listing of online charities, which at the time was still a new concept, you know, maybe I'll put you on that list, but I'm afraid you're pretty small potatoes. Damn. So then I found a directory of the top people at Newsweek, and I called the senior editor there, Jonathan Alter. I called him first because his last name began with A, so he showed up first in the alphabetical directory. And I called him during my lunch hour, and his assistant must have been out to lunch because he picked up the phone. And I said, hey, I'm a teacher up in the Bronx. I started this nonprofit with my students. Do you want to hear about it? And he said, sure. He didn't hang up on me. We talked for 45 minutes, and that night he wrote a column for the Newsweek website saying that this experiment growing out of a Bronx classroom might one day change philanthropy. So then I called up Stephanie Strom at the New York Times, all excited, and I was like, hey, Newsweek saw us as newsworthy, at least for their website, so you know, won't you give us a second look? And then she dashed my hopes. She said, I wouldn't touch your story with a 10-foot pole now that another reporter has covered you. The New York Times does not follow in the footsteps of other publications. I felt like an idiot for having told her that another media outlet had broken our story. So I wrote her an email apologizing for being so dumb. And she could tell how badly I felt. She took pity. She wrote me back, and she said, you know, you shouldn't feel quite so bad because you didn't have a chance in the first place. Because her editors had asked her to focus strictly on charities responding to 9/11. So there was my last opening. I spent like 2 hours crafting this email to Stephanie saying, hey, before you totally tune me out, you should know that there are a lot of classroom projects being created by teachers at Ground Zero, all focused on 9/11. I wrote this email to her. I called her up one more time over the weekend, so I would go straight to voicemail, and I wouldn't interrupt her while she was on deadline. And I said, this is the last time you'll ever hear from me. If you could just read this one final email. Monday, I was back at school teaching, and I checked my email in between periods, and Stephanie Strom had written back. She wanted to come do an interview for a major feature story in the New York Times. Now, let me tell you, I was over the moon. My parents raised me to be humble, but this was the New York Times. It felt like the skies had opened, and I had to shout. So I forwarded Mrs. Strom's email to my friend, and I said, guess who said she wouldn't touch our story with a 10-foot pole and now wants an interview? That's what hustling will get you. I beat my chest. I talked all kinds of smack. And I thought that I had hit forward, but I had hit reply, and the moment I realized, I yanked the electrical cord from out of the socket to shut off the computer, but it was too late. And I sent that trash-talking, guess who said she wouldn't touch our story with a 10-foot pole and now wants an interview, email directly to Stephanie Strom, philanthropy reporter for the New York Times. So naturally, I sent her another email apologizing for being so dumb. And to Ms. Strom's eternal credit, she did not hold it against me. She went on to write a major feature story for the Times saying that DonorsChoose.org might be the future of philanthropy. And since that time, we've been trying to prove her right. Arthur was nice enough to mention some of our statistics, but today we're getting on almost 2 million people who have given more than $300 million to classroom projects at more than half of all the public schools in America. It's 14 million students who've now got books and art supplies and field trips and recording devices and butterfly cocoons and therapeutic horseback riding that they need for a great education. And here in Georgia, people have donated more than $8.6 million to classroom projects on our site. There's more than 300,000 kids in Georgia who've gotten materials and more than 14,000 projects funded. My students and I, when we were working on this experiment, this kind of clunky website 15 years ago, we never dreamed that I would get to come and speak with folks like you, and that we would have numbers to share like these. And we certainly never dreamed that crowdfunding would become part of the zeitgeist. When DonorsChoose.org began, crowdfunding was years away from even being a word. But today, it's a movement. There are now hundreds of websites where people on the front lines can identify a need they see, propose a project they want to do, secure a loan for a small venture they want to start. And now anyone can become a philanthropist, a patron of the arts, a financier. There are hundreds of these sites. So I want to give you now an inside look at how we've made crowdfunding work in public schools in the United States. Now, when a teacher creates a project for funding, we first make sure it's legit, and we email follow-up questions to the teacher if anything isn't clear about what learning is going to take place. This school year alone, we'll get about 240,000 classroom project requests, each of which has to be carefully vetted and reviewed. And we used to pay people to do that work of reading over each project, reviewing it, and vetting it. And then we realized that our best teacher users were ready to volunteer their time to vet other teachers' project requests. So now, if you're a teacher and you've had like 30 projects funded on our site, we invite you to volunteer to vet other teachers' project requests. It's like, as we discussed today, like academic peer review meets Wikipedia. And now that we have crowdsourced this labor to our best teacher users, the time it takes us to vet and post a teacher's project has gone from 8 days when we were paying people to do it to 1.5 days now that we've turned to our own teacher users to become our coworkers, which is what crowdfunding is all about. It's about pushing intelligence out to the edge and seeing your so-called beneficiaries as your colleagues. So now the project's up on donorschoose.org. And it's time for people to choose which projects they want to fund. At any given moment, there are about 40,000 classroom project requests live on our site, and that's a lot to pick from. So we encourage donors to express a personal passion and look at the projects that match. A few years ago, there was a writer for Fortune magazine doing a story on Kiva and donorschoose.org as the two websites that Fortune thought were going to change philanthropy. And when we were done talking, the writer seemed decently impressed by our site, but he said that his personal passion was saving the salmon in the Pacific Northwest. Education wasn't quite his cause. But before he left the room, I did a keyword search for salmon in the Northwest on Donors Choose, and up came 5 classroom projects. The second result was from a teacher at a high school in Oregon who had created a salmon hatchery in the river flowing by his school, and he needed hip waders for his students to go into the river and maintain and build out this salmon hatchery. The top result was a project from a teacher on an island off Alaska, teaching in a one-room schoolhouse. She wrote in her project essay that she was 45 minutes away from the nearest store by airplane. And all of her students are Native Alaskans, and they had recorded their parents' folk tales about salmon, done research on salmon, and wanted to share that work with the outside world. So here was this guy who had a passion for salmon and 5 projects to choose from. And as a result, as a group of kids at an Oregon high school who now have the hip waders they need to build out their salmon hatchery. Last part of the donorschoose.org process is the best part. When a teacher gets a project funded, we don't hand out cash to the teacher. Instead, we purchase the resources and have them delivered to the classroom. If the project is seeking therapeutic horseback riding for disabled students, we're paying the horseback riding stable to provide that service. And then every donor, no matter how much money they've given, even if they've given just $1, gets photographs of their project in action, a thank you note from the teacher, an impact letter describing what students are learning. Donors who give $50 or more also get handwritten student thank you letters so that every donor can see and feel the impact that they've had and even correspond back and forth with the teacher they chose to help. Throughout this process, we try to be totally transparent. And I'll give you one example of that. Once in a while, maybe like 2 or 3% of the time, the classroom isn't able to provide those thank you letters. Maybe it's because the teacher was laid off or went on maternity leave or changed schools. It's usually a good reason, but internally, we call this a jilted donor situation. And when it happens, we contact the donor and acknowledge that we've fallen short, even though they've probably forgotten that they were ever due a package of thank you letters in the first place. And we invite them to pick another project to fund on our dime. Now, it might sound like a sacrificial fall-on-your-sword thing to do, but most of our donors are blown away that we would proactively apologize for not having provided that package of thank you letters. Few of them take us up on our offer of funding another project for them, but our apology note does often prompt them to make a whole new donation. We once looked at the numbers and concluded that our biggest revenue driver was screwing up and admitting it. which I think has implications. Kind of the way that people will reward you for being transparent and honest, I think has implications in all sorts of other fields. So that's how donorschoose.org began. That's how it works under the hood. I want to tell you about one criticism of our site, which is that donorschoose.org is a Bandaid solution. The accusation here is that we treat the symptoms, but not the causes of educational inequity. There are a lot of sort of traditional old line foundations out there that will say, we're not interested because we don't think you're changing the system itself. They'll say, where's the beef? Maybe they'll even worry that Donors Choose lets government off the hook by letting private citizens step in when the system is falling short. Tonight, I want to respond to that accusation, to that skepticism. Because I actually think that there are a few ways that our site could not only deliver books and art supplies and science equipment and amazing experiences, but could help to change the system itself. One of those ways starts with a little pop quiz, and that is anybody able to recognize what those 2 devices are? 3D printer. Okay, 3D printer. You got the one on the left. Can anyone recognize and shout out what the thing on the right is? All right. I haven't heard it yet. We're going to get to it in a second. So indeed, the device on the left is a 3D printer. The device on the right is an underwater robot, which is a a video camera that students can use to explore the ocean depths. Now, for quite some time, there was a major match offer on our site for any teacher requesting a 3D printer. And there was a match offer on our site for any teacher requesting this underwater robot so that they could take their students 12,000 leagues under the sea. Maybe not quite that deep, but deep enough to experience an underwater ecosystem that they would never otherwise come in contact with. And the companies behind these two devices would never have attempted to sell into K-12 education. That's something that requires a sales force and a group of lobbyists that are like 200 strong, and you've got to navigate a whole sort of educational industrial complex. But by using DonorsChoose.org, these two companies were able to introduce 3D printing and underwater exploration directly to hundreds of thousands of students in low-income communities. And it's getting bigger. In just a few weeks, there'll be a documentary coming out about Malala. And the filmmakers are using Donors Choose so that they can directly let teachers know about this incredible new film and provide an incentive, a match offer incentive, for any teacher who seeks funding to take their students to see Malala. By the way, if any of the teachers here want to see that movie, put up a project and it'll get almost all the way funded. And there's another teacher in California who used our site recently to equip all of her students with stand-up desks, because she thinks that if students are standing when they're learning, those, especially boys who have a lot of energy, a lot of restless energy, are actually able to exert it, and they can listen much more closely to the teacher. And yet, I think most superintendents are not yet persuaded of the wisdom of stand-up desks. It still seems like kind of newfangled and weird. But by using DonorsChoose.org, really forward-thinking teachers are able to get awesome inventions for their kids now. And we think that a lot of sort of ed tech entrepreneurs and inventors may adopt a similar strategy. There's another way we think we can change the system, and that is by opening up all the data generated by teachers like those in this room creating projects on our site. So more than 300,000 teachers have created 800,000 classroom project requests on our site. So we can now, by opening up the data attached to all those projects, we can let policymakers and budget makers see what resources teachers most need, what books middle school teachers in Georgia think are most effective at getting kids hooked on reading, what technology devices Atlanta high school teachers think are most important, as expressed by the projects that they're posting on our site, so that the powers that be can listen to classroom teachers, because we think that hardworking classroom teachers know their kids better than anybody else in the system. And if we can give those teachers voice, if we can give those teachers a seat at the budget-making table, we will have much wiser spending of education dollars. And we have two data scientists who are just starting to explore the potential of our data. They've started by looking at giving dynamics on our site. And they found that women tend to donate to classroom projects throughout the school year, while men tend to donate on special occasions. And we could only hypothesize that altruism comes naturally to women, but men need an external stimulus to remind them to be altruistic. I'm not going to ask Leos and Cancers to raise their hand, because donors with your astrological sign make smaller donations and give less frequently. Aries and Taurus make fewer donations. Sorry, you make smaller donations, but you give frequently. Are there any Capricorns in the room who want to raise their hands? So we have no idea why, but your cohort actually makes more donations and larger donations, and we have no explanation as to why that could be. Getting a little bit more serious, we took a look at 103,000 book projects on our site, and at the books that were most frequently requested. And the short of it is, if you're a middle school teacher, or if you are looking at funding books for middle school kids, make sure you've got Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And I see some nodding heads as well on that. Here's one final analysis, which you don't have to examine, but I will explain to you. And it's an analysis of the impact of the recession on low-income versus upper-income public schools. And what we found is that after the recession, teachers in low-income public schools started posting many more projects for basic materials like copy paper and pencils and dictionaries, as compared to enrichment projects like a field trip to Washington, D.C., or butterfly cocoons for a science experiment. Whereas in upper-income public schools, the recession led to no such increase in the proportion of requests for really basic stuff, which told us that the recession has had a terribly regressive, disparate impact on public schools, leaving kids in low-income communities without basic materials that they need to learn, whereas kids in upper-income communities, while maybe still financially struggling, at least do have the basics in their classrooms. And this is just scratching the surface of the potential of the data we've opened up, but the headline here is really that teachers are telling the powers that be what materials are most needed, what technology they most need, what activities are trending in the projects that they're creating on our site, and policymakers and budget makers can now listen to classroom teachers. Final way that we think we could change the system itself is politically the spiciest. Genuinely eager to hear your reaction. And that is a new take, a new approach to the merit pay debate. So the way it started was a few years ago, we were lucky enough to win the Google Impact Award, and it came with a $5 million grant. And we used that grant to underwrite Donors Choose classroom funding credits that we gave to teachers who launched and helped their students pass math and science AP courses. So the way it worked was, if you were a teacher in a low-income public high school and you raised your hand and said, all right, I'm going to start a physics AP course or a calculus AB course, you were given upfront Donors Choose classroom funding credits so you could fund your own projects and get the graphing calculators you would need or build the lab that you would need. And then at the end of the school year, every student who passed the math or science AP exam unlocked $100 of Donors Choose classroom funding credits for their teacher. So if you were one of these participating teachers and 20 of your students passed the calculus AB exam, you got a $2,000 classroom funding credit. Google was excited enough about the results that they took this approach with girls learning to code. And for a few months last school year, any public school teacher in America could take down $1,000 of Donors Choose classroom funding credits if and when 4 of their female students demonstrated proficiency in computer science fundamentals using either Codecademy or Khan Academy. Now this might look like, smell like, sound like performance pay, merit pay, because it's a financial reward commensurate to student educational outcomes, but by switching the currency with which the reward is paid from cash to classroom funding credits, we've created something completely different. And actually, the leaders of both teachers' unions have responded really positively to this approach to rewarding excellence. Because you can imagine, we're speaking to teachers' hearts rather than to their wallets. Because newsflash, teachers didn't get into teaching because of all the money that they could make. And we're simply looking to say, when you've done something incredible with your students, we want to invite you, the teacher, to decide how to further transform your classroom with credits that will enable you to get the books, the art supplies, the science equipment that you need. And imagine what it's like for students who can say, you see that classroom library that just got delivered yesterday? I got that for our classroom when I passed the physics AP exam. That field trip we went on yesterday, I made that possible when I learned how to code. So in this sort of venomous debate over merit pay, we've kind of hacked it and created something where I think that the reform warriors and the teachers' unions could actually come to agreement on this sort of alternative approach to rewarding amazing teachers who do amazing things with their students. So those are just 3 examples of how we think we could help to change the very system itself. So that is basically it on my talk. Now it's time to do something that has not happened before in this speaker series. The Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation was generous enough to say, all right, instead of there being any like honorarium or anything like that, instead let's take that and invite everybody in this room to go forth tonight and become a microphilanthropist. So that is why each of you has an envelope on the table that you can open now or later that holds a $25 DonorsChoose.org gift card for you to spend on a classroom project of your choice. And my challenge to you is to do like that Fortune magazine writer and express a personal passion. You could search for gardening, because you've been thinking about that topic lately. You could search for your favorite books being requested that were written by your favorite author, Roald Dahl or Dr. Seuss or Stephen Hawkins, who knows. You could do a search for the sport you played in high school, your favorite subject in high school, a topic that you've been thinking about. Express a passion, look at the classroom project requests that match, and choose a project that really speaks to you personally. What you're holding is actually the gift of giving that Stephen Colbert gives to every guest who goes on his show. And there are all sorts of people who've picked all sorts of interesting projects. But what I am most curious to see is the projects that you choose to support. And I hope that when you spend this $25 gift of giving on a classroom project of your choice, that you will tell the teacher why you picked their project. That's part of our checkout flow. And we want you to explain to the teacher why you picked their project. And as you're doing so, I hope you will appreciate what you and an awesome teacher can do together when gatekeepers do not stand in your way. Thank you so much for your time tonight. I so appreciate it. Thank you.